What's up, you guys? We are going to be going over Hamza's MEET prep and how we were able to utilize a very interesting and unique programming strategy to be able to come away with all-time PRs on both squat and deadlift and hit a massive bench on the day. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, let's get into things here. Mainly what I want to cover with Hamza's MEET prep is basically our unique programming strategy that we used. Credit to the coach. I believe his name is Stuart Lockie. If I said that wrong, I'm sorry. But essentially, he was on a podcast for Powerlifting Now, and I was listening, and he gave a unique programming approach to people who are in the untested division of powerlifting. I decided to listen to it and try it out with Hamza because he competes in the untested side of things, and it turned out really well, and I want to kind of go over how I implemented that. Probably isn't perfect, but definitely a unique way that turned out to be a very good approach for Hamza in MEET prep. The whole basis of everything that, again, I'm getting from Stuart Lockie is the fact that every rep that someone who's untested does is inherently more fatiguing. Therefore, the programming should be a little bit different, or can be a little bit different, knowing that everything they do, especially as they're ramping up dosage, can be very, very fatiguing. So what a tested lifter that does a set of 3 with 500 pounds, that's going to be X level fatigue induced from that set. But with someone who is on the untested side of things, a set of 3 with 500 pounds is inherently a lot more fatiguing. Therefore, you need to kind of program around that. That's kind of the basis of how I did things and why I did things. This basically the stay dialed part 2, and the last block of prep are really the 3 blocks that I want to go over. And really the main thing I want to touch on is how we were able to do a light squat and bench week, heavy squat and bench week, and then light squat and bench week, heavy squat and bench week. But with deadlift, what we did was we just kept it pretty sub-max, and we just basically linearly increased it over the course of the 3 blocks. So I did not take that light and heavy approach for deadlift because we did so little work already that I didn't think we really needed to have that variability week to week in workload, and we keep that workload basically the same. But with Hamza, with bench, his pecs sometimes would mess him up. He'd get a little bothered from bench pressing too much. Squat, his knees, his quads, all of that would get a little beat up comparatively to his deadlift, which just seemed like it could just go week by week by week without any major changes because we were already doing so little. I want to go over how we did things. So really, we had these 3 blocks here. What we would do is a light squat and bench, heavy, light, heavy, and then we would do essentially, like, to some extent, a quote-unquote deload week. You'll see here, we took off a set of squat. We did 1 single here, and we changed up the formula a little bit here. But nonetheless, the idea is that we did drop a little bit of workload on this deload week, a little bit more than a typical light week. Like, our light weeks would have the same volume, roughly, not for everything, but roughly, as our heavy weeks. We would just drop intensity a bit. Now, this light week, this deload week, I'll call it a light week, but essentially deload week would be a little bit more than our typical light bench and squat weeks. Probably getting a little confused there, but it'll make a little more sense as we get into this last block of prep. So we had a second block here. Again, same kind of formula. You'll see the green highlight squat, bench, heavy squat, and bench. And then this week 5, we have like a deload. And then we go into, really, this is his week 1. The week 6 here is really his week 1. So we really had our first week here where heading into this last block of prep, we hit a single here, and then we went into singles on squat and singles on deadlift. So this was really his week 1. And then we had a whole bunch of rehab stuff we inputted just to make sure he keeps upper body healthy. But that kind of shows you, like, keeping his joints, his muscles, and everything healthy was a big priority for us, and that's exactly why we did this formula in the first place. So we thought if we just went like a typical linear increase for everything in terms of intensity and keeping volume the exact same for the whole block, it may not do us as well as having some undulation week to week. This last block here, you'll see we had the heavy squat and heavy bench at the tail end of this right here. So this is really his week 1. And then we went into here. It was light squat and bench, heavy squat and bench, and then light squat. And then we lined up meet day with his week 4. We knew pretty predictably that he would show up pretty strong on the day. Meet day, our goal was over 595 and over 660, which we'll get into what we hit. But I want to go over what he hit about 2 weeks out, really, in his scenario. And really good because we're ramping in. It's not like we were going for a max. We were just going for something that would bridge the gap between the week 2 and meet day. But again, to kind of give you that example of how we do the lightness on squat, you'll see he hit here. I'll show you, but he hit 562 on this week, and then he went to 474 for 2. So you'll see that drastic change in workload on his primary from that week 2 to week 3. And you'll see here on bench we had the single, and then we had doubles here. A little drop in workload in terms of intensity, and then 2x3, 2x3 dropped it a little bit. You'll see just minor drops week to week, nothing major, especially for bench. We didn't see a major need for major drops, but that's the foundation of what I'm getting at here. And then here you'll see 407 didn't change the volume, but just dropped the intensity. Didn't change the volume, just dropped the intensity a little bit. And then deadlift, on a secondary deadlift, we literally just did 4 singles, ramping up and load throughout the whole entire block. Again, there's no undulation with deadlift at all. Here on bench, we would do singles and 2x5, and then we do 1x5 here. So this block, what we did for bench was we kept the singles going to keep the intensity pretty much ramping up, but we would just drop a set on the light weeks for bench just to kind of decrease a little bit of workload and decrease the back off intensity. So we'd keep that peak intensity there, but drop off that additional workload that we didn't think was necessary to promote that top end strength. That's what we were doing this last block, and we were making small changes on bench through these three blocks because that was our lift that we were trying to see the needle move forward a little bit more, which on meet day showed up really well, which we'll get into. And then this day really stayed pretty much the same throughout the block. That didn't really have to change much. So really the undulation was on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and then Saturdays and Sundays. And accessory wise, in terms of undulation, we didn't really do much undulation there. Like you'll see this accessory day, we didn't undulate much at all. We did take out a set here because it was, late week and we were trying to peak for the meet. But nonetheless, really you'll see here that this is the best frame of reference. Here and here, there's really no change in volume or intensity. Accessory wise, we didn't really undulate too much unless we found it necessary for the week. That's the idea. So compounds, we would undulate to some extent by week, and then accessories, we would not really undulate at all until the latter half of this last block, and then we started to try to peak, so we took out some sets here and there. But that's the idea. We would undulate, and that would give his body time to perform and then rest, perform and then rest, and we would make it so it's pretty predictable. So long as week 4, he was able to come out and be strong. So I'm going to go over his heaviest lifts. This is what he was able to hit about 2 weeks out. Pretty fast. Again, like a good bridge into the meet day. It was quite the bridge. We took a big jump into the meet day. Right here, he hit 277.5, 611. Moved pretty well. Definitely had kilos in the tank, which was the goal. We were trying to go 9 for 9. One thing unique about his situation, getting those knee sleeves on were not fun. So you'll see that's why the timer was near the end, 23 seconds left, because we were struggling with getting his knee sleeves on. So you'll see that I think his right one is like barely on, scrunched up a lot. We already come out very strong. And I want to show you his heaviest bench, which he misgrouped a little bit. Lost a little bit of positioning there, but it went pretty well. We were pretty happy with it. Knowing we'd probably only had 2.5, 5 kilos of that on the day, given how that moved. And then his bench, you'll see that peaked very nicely because this moved better than that patch up I just showed you. So that was a huge win. And then his deadlift, I'll show you his heaviest deadlift. We did 280, 616, very easy. We took a huge jump into meet day. 312.5, massive day, 689 pounds, and moved awesome. Not much lower than his final heaviest deadlift. So you'll see that kind of undulation in his program really worked out and peaked him very nicely. That's in essence what I wanted to go over for his program. Definitely very interesting programming, and not for everyone, but I wanted to give it a try with Hamza for this meet, and it worked out beautifully. I hope this was very interesting to see and how we were able to implement this with Hamza. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch. I hope you were able to learn something about the zigzag approach and how it can be greatly useful for someone who is in the untested side of powerlifting, and how it can lead to a fantastic meet day performance. And take it easy.